All right, well, let's get started. There are a bunch of folks that are rolling in now, and we're live on Facebook, so we can get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Fireside with the founders of SafePay, Ziyad and Raza. As many of you know, Stripe recently participated in SafePay's seed funding round to accelerate their growth. And so we're really excited to see Raza and Ziyad here. And we're really grateful that they're able to join us today from Pakistan and talk about their experiences. I'm personally really excited to be hosting this event, as someone who's Pakistani, and I'm really inspired by the work that they're both doing, both for the company that they're building, which has been pretty incredible, but also for the potential for the company to really help businesses and individuals in Pakistan as well. And so what we'll do today is I have some questions prepared for them that we'll walk through, but we'll leave some time at the end for live questions. For those live questions, we'll just read off the chat. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll grab them at the end there. With that, just some really quick background on SafePay for those of you who may not be familiar. SafePay was founded in 2019 by Ziyad and Raza with the aim to build digital payment solutions for Pakistani merchants, including increasing digital payment acceptance beyond credit and debit cards, which are usually more common in the Western world or like in the US and Europe. And so also looking to expand to things like mobile wallets and bank accounts. I'm going to let them tell the story and how well they're doing and all their growth to date. And so with that, I'm going to pause. And before we jump into my questions, I would love if Ziyad and Raza, if you could both give us a quick introduction of yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. First of all, thank you for organizing this and being a part of this, Bilal. So I'm the co-founder of SafePay, and I help manage the engineering and product side of things. Raza, who's my co-founder, we kind of grew up together in Pakistan. We've known each other for now over 26 years, I think. And it's interesting because we spent every kind of waking minute almost together in the same school, in the same class. But the only kind of separation we had was when we went off to college. And I came to the US to pursue a degree, interestingly, in math and econ, so nowhere near computer science at the time. So I was training to kind of become a banker to kind of follow in the footsteps of my grandfather. But through some twist of fate, I ended up in the software world out of college and in my first job. And it was around about the time when there was like a renaissance of startups happening in the US. And that kind of really appealed to me, not just because of the problems that were being solved, but also just, the interesting people that were solving them. And I kind of just got deeper into the world, and I had to kind of teach myself a lot of those skills. But that journey kind of led me to, living in New York for a couple of years and then moving out to the Bay Area, where I was most recently, working full time for the most part while building SafePay, and then decided to kind of commit full time and bring on Raza as my co-founder.
Thanks, Ziyad. So yeah, just where Ziyad kind of left off, after university, he went to the US. I went to the UK for university. I read law at university and, proceeded to kind of go down the track that follows from that. I trained and qualified as a solicitor at one of the kind of leading international law firms in London. Had the opportunity to work with, teams from across the world. I spent a bit of time in Frankfurt as well, ultimately kind of specializing in banking and finance transactions. And then towards the tail end of that kind of career, working in the financial regulation space, which was actually the most relevant thing to what I'm doing now. And so around 3 years ago, I decided to kind of up sticks in London, move my life and kind of, return to Pakistan, not really with much of a plan, but knowing that, there was something happening over here in the startup space. The kind of green shoots were emerging. It's obviously a lot more apparent now. And I can safely say that over the last 3 years, while I have been here, I've been able to kind of see the stage just before, things have become what they have, and seen the real kind of pain points and troubles and stuff. That being said, having moved back over here, it gave me an opportunity to kind of explore and pursue learnings about the startup ecosystem, and also kind of reconnect with Ziyad about SafePay, which was the kind of solution he was thinking of for the market over here. And I just happened to be the right person, in the right place at the right time for us to kind of re-engage after those years apart.
Thanks, Raza. And that's a great segue to the thing we love in Silicon Valley is the origin story. How did the company get started? What's kind of the legend or the pain point behind it? Whether it's the founders of Airbnb trying to figure out what kind of business they wanted to operate, or the founders at Stripe, for example, just having a really painful time with payments in the US. I would love to hear the origin story of SafePay and how it got started. How do you get the idea? When you recognize the need? What were some of the early problems you were looking to solve?
Yeah, it's very kind of, I guess, quintessential startup story from that perspective. But in around the time of 2017, when I was still working full time, I started to get more and more interested in the startup activity happening in Pakistan, particularly on Facebook groups, where a lot of interesting, smart entrepreneurs were hanging out and discussing issues that they were facing. And a lot of the time, I guess the common theme that kept appearing was the lack of, a modern financial, payments platform similar to the likes of Stripe, Braintree, PayPal at the time in the US, and more so the dissatisfaction of in these people that those companies were expanding globally everywhere except Pakistan, and for me it kind of resonated a little bit because obviously, that I used to go back to Pakistan quite often, and then would face these challenges of being able to kind of transact online. But in the US, I would always kind of take that for granted. The stability to transact, do commerce, do business on the internet was something that was so easy that it kind of just became second nature. But in Pakistan, that was not the case. And I kept kind of juggling the idea in my head whether or not it's something that I really wanted to pursue, but because I guess just the size of the problem was a bit intimidating. But I was like, let's just build an MVP and try it out, and how hard could it be? So around about 2018, still working full time, I started kind of hacking away at this little side project of mine, more so to kind of learn how financial transactions kind of move on the internet, than really thinking this would be more of like a startup that I would kind of commit my life to. But that kind of resulted in a way that I was just kind of spend my evenings and my weekends and really had no social life for at least 6 to 8 months. But that was okay because it was really kind of enjoying to work on that. But we launched it in May of 2019. Again, a very kind of basic MVP that did what it was supposed to do, which was accept credit card details from a customer and process them through the internet and give the merchant whatever money they were owed for that. I didn't think it would be something that a lot of people would take to, because I had then realized that other companies in Pakistan were also doing something similar. So you had banks already offering something similar. JazzCash, EasyPesa had their own solution. So I was like, all right, it's just probably just dead in the water. But it kind of took off. We got a lot of positive feedback and some very interesting questions from the community. And I think for us, it was just a matter of making sure that those first few people who really tried us out were really taken care of in terms of their experience, because we knew from the start we just had to build sort of like a trust base, because we were just two random guys, and dealing with people's money really kind of requires a certain level of trust. So for that, we had to kind of really build that base. But I think just my own kind of enjoyment of helping people set up their websites with installing the plugin and just seeing how they were kind of interacting with SafePay so I could improve the product for them was also something that was really valuable for myself. And they kind of, thankfully, I guess, enjoyed the experience enough to tell their friends and their colleagues, and it kind of just grew organically from there. And that's when I kind of also started talking to Raza, because I knew that I'd need someone on the legal side, on the regulatory side. And that was not me. I hate reading dense legal documents. So yeah, Raza quitting his job and moving to Pakistan and coming into SafePay, it's actually all my fault. So
Can you tell us a little bit about the business right now? How's the business been doing? I mean, you've talked a bit about the origin story and how it got started. I would love to hear about the growth and some of what's happened today.
Yeah. Raza, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So After our kind of beta period in around October, November, when we kind of finalized our seed round, we realized that, one, we were onto something, and two, that to kind of invest in the infrastructure that we wanted to build for payments and the businesses that we wanted to work with, we'd really need to kind of almost go back to the drawing board to kind of optimize for what previously we didn't have the opportunity to do as part of a kind of the startup environment. So we kind of took the opportunity then to kind of rethink about how we wanted to accept, which payment instruments to accept through SafePay. Credit and debit cards were great. They were actually the easiest to kind of integrate with and facilitate payments through, just because kind of at the back end, you have players like Visa, MasterCard with their kind of APIs through which we could kind of build into our product. But we knew kind of the nub of transaction volume and value, frankly, over here is through kind of bank account payments and the mobile wallets. So right now you have Jazz Cash, which is owned by a telecom provider called Mobilink, Easy Pesa, which is also kind of owned by a mobile provider called Telenor, and there's a new entrant called UPesa, which is, a surprise, owned by another telecom operator. The kind of penetration these guys have in the market is massive. However, from our kind of anecdotal understanding, kind of, the bare kind of minimum of information that is available about volumes of transactions going through these networks, we knew it was a huge kind of area that we wanted to tackle. And based on that, we reached out to other fintechs in the market who had integrations available with these players. And I think that also kind of comes back to the ethos behind SafePay, is that we see ourselves collaborating with other fintechs in the space to kind of maximize the size of the pie, rather than kind of be in a silo and just say that, well, we're only going to work with XYZ and not enable payments across the spectrum. That being said, what it did mean was that we had to take our services offline. The kind of 300 merchants that we did have, and luckily, again, the kind of relationships we had with them were very constructive. We were able to kind of build out in the last few months those integrations with bank accounts, with mobile wallets. So we're in kind of soft launch mode at the moment. We're live with around 20 merchants. And again, it's more kind of testing the systems to see whether they can actually withstand the volumes that we would expect. Because again, Visa and MasterCard have been doing this for decades. There are no open banking kind of APIs available in Pakistan. Audience members may have heard of Raza, which has recently got some publicity, and which is a UPI-like solution to allow for payments over here. But still, our kind of vision and what we've come to realize is that we need to invest correctly in the right kind of technology and infrastructure to really enable the volume of payments that we envisage through SafePay.
Thanks, Raza. That's great context. And obviously, everything you pointed to is so incredibly important in terms of making sure you have the right resourcing for reliability, security to support your merchants. But I think it's also indicative of the fact that you've already worked with 300 merchants, and I'm sure they're knocking down the door to work, for what you're working on right now. You talked about sort of the broader fintech community and collaborating with a lot of other startups and companies in Pakistan. Pakistan has always been a country of hustlers and entrepreneurs. Whether it's starting businesses in Pakistan or those same individuals migrating to the US or Europe or other parts of the world and starting businesses there. But in the last 2 years, you kind of pointed to this at the beginning of the chat. There seems to be a really large wave of energy of new tech startups and investment funds and just energy in the last year that's really unparalleled. What do you think is driving that change in the last 2 years relative to previous years and what was happening before that?
Sure. I actually really enjoy this question because, again, as I mentioned earlier, like I moved back 3 years ago when it seemed to me like the startup space was dead. But there were kind of green shoots. So venture capital had started coming in, but the kind of check sizes were very small. Not very founder friendly, frankly. And I think, that had its impact as well in the kind of startup space over here. There have been players involved locally, which have really kind of beaten the drum for startups and the ecosystem. And I wish I could take them all by name, but there are quite a few, and they range from the kind of National Incubation Center, which is a government-sponsored institution, which has amazing kind of mentors and resources available to startups over here, to kind of public-private partnerships. One that we participated in was called the Nest, which is based in Karachi, and I think until 12 months ago, that was probably the best known platform for startups in Pakistan. And again, having personally been involved with them and had mentorship through them, there are names like Jahan Ara, for example, who maybe like really fought the good fight without any of the publicity, and kind of mentoring the startups up there, and maybe not the startups which are now getting the kind of publicity that we're seeing, but the kind of infrastructure that was required over here, because all these startups, there's no surprise, need talent, and they need kind of resources as well. And it just so happens that there is that kind of bank of talent over here, because there have been these kind of incubation centers over the last few years. What I would say is, in the last 18 months, the kind of space has heated up to a point like I would never have expected. I'm personally really happy to be involved with SafePay at this time as well. I think one thing Ziyad and I always used to mention when we were speaking with investors, when we got into YC, for example, was, it felt like the right time to be doing what we're doing. 2 years was maybe too early. 2 years later, 2 years, early would have been too early. And then 2 years later would have been 2 years too late. And I think the kind of evidence speaks for itself in terms of the startups that are emerging, the kind of founders that are emerging as well. And, I'm personally a huge fan of founder-led startups with big personalities and a mission, compared to, like, let's face it, in Pakistan, corporate Pakistan is kind of embedded with Sates, etc. And I'm sure that's a term people are familiar with it in the audience over here. That being said, there are VCs as well, which have, grown in size as well, and their risk appetite has also increased. And I think also COVID had a huge part to play with it. In the last 15 months, the level of digitization is increased exponentially. People are very comfortable kind of ordering, whether it be food or e-commerce, through those kind of areas as well. And just, some facts I have off the top of my head is there was a survey done, a national survey done, where it was established a week or two ago. This was in the national newspaper here. That 93% of households have access to a mobile phone of some sort. And, just seeing the kind of smartphone numbers that are published by GSMA as well, and organizations like that, the volumes are huge. So I think there's no doubt that the future of the economy over here is going to be tech-driven. And, it's already a hot space globally. There's no reason why it shouldn't be the same in Pakistan, in my opinion.
Thanks for all that, Raza. That's great context and helpful for us to understand, all of the energy that's been pretty incredible, especially the last 6 months. One quick follow-up question to that. Can you tell us a little bit about how SafePay is distributed when it comes to its employees? Are they all in one city? Are they spread out across Pakistan or other countries? And how has COVID impacted that?
That's something that Raza and I talk about quite a lot. But it's just generally so traditionally, historically, I guess we were a remote first company, just because I was based in San Francisco and Raza was in Karachi. And, we thought that we'd see how that works, because at the time we didn't really, we weren't really convinced that this is something that we wanted to devote ourselves to. And I didn't want to kind of leave, my life behind in San Francisco at the time. And likewise, I wasn't able to convince Raza to move out to the Bay Area so easily. So we were like, all right, we have tools like Zoom and Slack and, all of these amazing companies that were available to us. And we were like, let's just utilize them and see how it goes. Also, I guess it was COVID. Everyone had shut their offices, and the trend of remote working was being like romanticized. So we were just kind of following with that. So we had a few kind of early hires or team members. I wouldn't even say like official hires at the time. It's just people we convinced to help us out. They joined us in Karachi. So I think they were with Raza, and I was completely comfortable working with them remotely, because the 12-hour time difference worked out really well for me. But after that, we kind of just stuck to it and decided to see how it would evolve. So now we have, I guess, four or five employees in Karachi. So we see them in person and we interact quite frequently. And then we have two in Islamabad, one in Berlin, and one in the East Coast in the US. So we're spread across a couple of different time zones, and it's at times challenging to manage. But I think it also adds that element of diversity to the team as well, because we get a lot of different perspectives from everyone that we work with, and that is something that I'm extremely excited about, more so than the annoyance of the managing different time zones and stuff.
Thanks for sharing that, Ziyad. It's pretty incredible that you were able to get this company started while you're living in California. The Raza's in Pakistan. There's incredible convergence that happens there. I think is really impressive, and I'm sure for all those that are listening who, Farhan shared this stat with us before the call, that I think folks have registered for this event across 14 countries and 72 cities. So you can be anywhere and start a company these days, right? And that company can be focused on Pakistan or the country you're in, and that's pretty incredible. And along those lines, Open in of itself is a community of technologists, engineers, business professionals, entrepreneurs, many of whom have already started or are maybe looking to one day start their own business. What advice would you give them if they're looking to start their own business one day? And said a little bit differently, what advice would you give yourself prior to starting SafePay?
Sure. I can kick off with that one, Ziyad. So as Ziyad mentioned, we kind of both entered SafePay land at different stages. It was very much in kind of Ziyad's mind before I joined. I think if I could have gone back in time, I kind of entered a bit naively, I'd say, in terms of the problem that we were trying to solve. And as Ziyad actually mentioned quite early on, the size of the problem that we were trying to solve. I think having moved from London back to Pakistan and seeing the fintech kind of landscape over there, which is it's very mature now. I assume that things would move at a similar pace over here, and that there would be that kind of engagement with financial partners, the regulator, etc. But reality check basically. So at the start, it was a bit of a kind of it was a bit challenging. It was kind of getting used to new things, new working practices, etc. Expectations were very different from my side. I think one thing we did get right was having the right team together. So if anyone in the audience is thinking of doing something like this, whether Pakistan focused or not, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have someone who you can trust and who you can work with, because trust me, this is being on this kind of venue or forum is one of the highs for us, right? It's great to get publicity and great to be praised for what we're doing, but there are a lot of lows as well. And you really need to have someone there with you who can understand that, and you're able to negotiate that with each other as well, and be honest and frank as well. Not everyone has the luxury of having a friend who you've known for 26 years. So, just be realistic about who you can kind of reach out to and stuff. So yeah, from my side, that's kind of some of the advice that I would give.
Yeah, and I think just to add on, again, this is, I guess, probably heard a bunch of times and sounds cliche to a certain extent, but it's still very true, which is why I guess it gets repeated so often. But when you are building something or you are thinking of starting your own company, it's very important to obviously listen to your gut and your instincts more so than having your judgment kind of clouded by different opinions. But more so than that, once you are ready with an idea that you want to solve, hopefully that solution is because of a problem that you yourself are facing, or someone close to you is facing. More so than just going ahead and building it in kind of like a silo of thinking that the solution is in your head and that's the only solution to build. I would recommend, and this is something that I wish I did, is to talk to customers who you don't like, who you think are going to use your product. It's kind of paradoxical to call them customers because you haven't built something, they're not using it yet, but those will be your first customers if you engage with them early and you engage with them often. And not only will they be your customers, they will eventually be your ambassadors of sort if you build something for them that solves their problem. So I think that is something that I would focus on if I were to do this again.
That's really sound advice, Ziyad and Raza. Thank you for that. And along the lines of what you mentioned, I think when Stripe was getting up and started, it was a lot of that, a lot of engaging with customers in an iterative way, where you roll out, talk to them a lot about the feature we're thinking about. We still do this a lot. Get their feedback, launch it, and then iterate really quickly. And then those core customers both help shape the product, but then they also very much become your ambassadors, they're your early adopters, and they give you some of the most valuable feedback for helping the product scale eventually. Um, would love to switch gears a little bit. Give us a misconception about Pakistan and why it's wrong, and then alternatively, tell us something that is challenging but also true in Pakistan.
Yeah, so I can take that one. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I came across, maybe that has changed in the last couple of months, is that it's really not a market worth addressing. I think if anything, just in terms of demographics, the kind of youthfulness of the population, sure, there are kind of inherent problems, within the economy, but I do think there is a large target market for most business types over here. And, the idea, and also that being said, I think it's a great place to actually launch and test your product before kind of thinking of other potentially more lucrative markets as well. I mean, from our perspective, for example, a lot of the feedback we get from merchants, feed into our products, which I know, for example, other fintechs in the UK, from the ones that I follow, don't have those kind of solutions. And just from kind of word of mouth, speaking to my network over there, it seems like there could be a use case for that. So I think that is one misconception from my side, and why I think it's wrong. And I'm hoping now with this kind of shift in momentum, basically we're going to start seeing startups maybe more established businesses in the next, let's say, 4 to 5 years, actually kind of reaching out of Pakistan and becoming kind of more well-known. It'll probably start off in the Middle East and then move to Africa. And then who knows, like in the US, you may be speaking to you could be speaking to a unicorn. Hopefully that's SafePay, again, in 5 years' time. But yeah, that's from my side.
To add on to the second question, so I think there are plenty of challenges in this country, no doubt. And, from infrastructure to mobility to education, just to, name the core ones that are kind of apparent right now. But, instead of just talking about the challenges in Pakistan, I think, as most, I guess, entrepreneurs who are hopefully listening probably think about, is like a challenge to them is more so like an opportunity that's waiting to be overcome almost. So there is really no point of starting a startup if there aren't problems to be solved, and there are many in Pakistan. So I think that's the way to kind of think about these issues in Pakistan, and they're just low-hanging fruits that are waiting to be picked up by smart risk-taking people, and that's how kind of we also approach that.
Well, Raza, I really want to compliment you for taking on this challenge in Pakistan. It's not a tiny one by any means. And as you mentioned, I think it's individuals and entrepreneurs like yourself that are the ones that come along and take on the mini challenges that not just get to solve them, but then also can shape how society and how business functions. And so I really commend you for all the work that you're doing. You talked about, working at Nest for a while, and you also recently went through Y Combinator. Can you tell us about that experience? Was it helpful? Would you recommend it? What was it like? What was it like going through during COVID? We'd love to hear about the experience.
Sure. I'll take that. So I've been a huge fan of Y Combinator ever since I think college, when I would be lurking on Hacker News for for years, and it was always kind of like a personal kind of dream of mine to get accepted into Y Combinator. So from time to time, I'd always think about submitting an application, but it was always at the time really intimidating. But when we did finally, we attended startup school before we attended the core YC program, and we were actually one of the, I guess there were like 10 or 11 finalists, and we were actually one of the ones who won the startup school grant at the time. So that was something that was really promising and proved to us that we were onto something, and gave us enough confidence to kind of apply for the core YC program. So when we did get in, obviously we were just over the moon. Raza didn't really understand what YC was at the time, so I had to kind of bring him up to speed. But to me, it was just something that was really kind of like a dream come true. And that's when we kind of heard that, YC would be going fully remote for our batch. So we were like the first batch that was fully remote. So we had no in-person meetings. We didn't have any face-to-face like interaction with other startups in our batch. But the amazing thing was that YC to this day continues to kind of think of itself as a startup, being able to kind of adapt rapidly to crazy changing situations in the world instead of deciding to, close the batch for this year until, the COVID situation eases up. They were like, you know what, we'll just kind of adapt how we do this program. And they were able to do, I think, a phenomenal job to the point where not only did we make meaningful connections with other batchmates, I think that's going to be important for us for years to come, but we got to interact with startups from all over the world because the remote aspect of YC allowed founders from countries to kind of participate without having to be physically in Mountain View. And I think removing that obstacle kind of opened the door for a lot of founders to apply. So that was one interesting thing. The other thing personally for us was really beneficial was that Raza was able to kind of attend YC while sitting in Karachi, and I was able to do it from my home in San Francisco. And we still kind of maintain that remote work life. But yeah, I think it's a very kind of it's a really kind of surreal experience, to be honest. Something that I would highly recommend. And we were the first kind of fintech to be accepted into Y Combinator from Pakistan, but after us, I think they've been increasing the number of not only the applicants who are applying, but also the number who are accepted into Y Combinator from Pakistan. So yeah, highly encourage everyone to apply. And if you're ever in need of any help in your application, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks for that context, Ziyad. And again, congratulations. Going to YC is a huge thing. So really impressed that you all went through that, and very interesting hearing about how it was remote. As Ziyad mentioned, by the way, if you are thinking about applying, absolutely, reach out to folks who've done it before. Stripe, we also have a support program as well via our Atlas program, where we actually review YC applications and give folks feedback as well. So if that's of interest, feel free to reach out and let us know as well. You often hear about, you talked about the consumer experience of paying for things in Pakistan, whether it's with Easy Paisa or whatever it might be. Tell us about the merchant experience of setting up and accepting payments in Pakistan, and how SafePay is approaching that, how they're thinking about that.
Sure. So the kind of status quo until today is that for a merchant to accept online payments, they normally had to open a bank account with a bank that would provide them a gateway of some sort. And there were heaps of kind of friction towards this. One is, people in general in Pakistan don't want to really approach a bank because the experience is quite, old school, let's say. And on top of that, to get access to, let's say, a Visa kind of payment gateway, they would have to not only put a security deposit of around $500, they would have to commit to minimum number of transactions a month and even a monthly fee at times. And all this kind of baked into with an integration process, like a technical integration process, which could stretch into months. And just from me recounting this experience, it's too much friction for a merchant, and particularly startups, right? They're not going to really be incentivized to go through that process to begin with. And even if they do, frankly, the kind of, they wouldn't be acknowledged by the banks. At least that's what we saw when we started, and that was a kind of big problem that we wanted to solve. Obviously, there are kind of household names over here, and whether it be in the kind of fast fashion space or in the e-commerce space, they were able to kind of get preferential access to payment gateways versus kind of smaller entrepreneurs. And for Ziyad and myself, and this is like something we really connected with early on, that was just nonsense, because it was automatically kind of propagating this kind of oligopoly of some sort, where you have these bigger brands that did have access to online payments, for example, and customers, therefore, across Pakistan who could pay them. and also favorable kind of transaction fee rates as well. And whereas you had someone who in 3 or 4 years' time wanted to be like one of these companies, but from the get-go just wouldn't ever be able to achieve that scale. So the predominant mode of settlement, at least in an e-commerce setting, is cash, and cash on delivery in particular. And there are huge amounts of kind of issues with this, from liability as to like if your cash disappears, to the actual inconvenience and the cost involved in getting that cash from someone's hand into your bank account, and the kind of delay in working capital that results in. In terms of integrating it, you mentioned easy. So we've been talking about bank accounts, mobile wallets, credit cards, and debit cards as separate payment instruments. Originally, and what is happening now is that a merchant, if they want to accept payments across the spectrum of instruments, have to have kind of individual relationships with each of these providers and do separate kind of technical integrations. And again, it's not cost effective, it's not time effective as well. And the end result is that a lot of merchants just decide they want to kind of just stick to cash being used as the mode of settlement. Now with SafePay, the kind of problem that we're solving is that a merchant has to only integrate with us and our kind of easy to use plugins, and customer support as well, so that we're always there to kind of guide them in that respect. And once they plugged into SafePay, they're able to accept payments across the spectrum. So bank accounts, mobile wallets, credit card or debit card payments as well. And we've kind of tried to condense the KYC, know your customer or know your merchant kind of onboarding process as well, because again, to this date, to onboard with a traditional provider, you actually have to go physically to a bank and sign all sorts of documents, use your fingerprint and whatnot, like with a stamp pad and stuff. So it's a lot of friction. Whereas many other economies have moved beyond that, and we're hoping to be able to do that through digital KYC as well. We're fortunate that, and again, comes back to the point, like what we're doing now makes more sense than it did maybe 2 or 3 years ago, because the state bank and the regulator itself has realized like digital KYC or digital onboarding is the future for sure. And those steps are being taken. And the position that we're in right now, we're able to actually inform or provide our perspective, at least, as to how that can happen. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Ziyad, if I've missed out anything, please feel free to mention.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful context. And one piece of context I want to share is I think sometimes we, say things are so hard in Pakistan and really challenging there. To be clear, it was equally challenging in the US about a decade ago. So the US has made some, a number of strides there, but, a lot of countries in the world face this problem. And so it's really exciting to see SafePay handling this in Pakistan as well. So I think that makes me really excited about what what you all will build. Let's run through a few more quick questions, then we'll jump to some rapid fire, and then we have a bunch of questions that have come in the chat as well. Tell us about fintech in Pakistan. You talked about a lot of the other companies that you're collaborating with. What are folks working on? What gets you excited? What will the experience of fintech, you think, how will that shape the consumer merchant experience over the next couple of decades?
Yes, I think fintech over the last 2 or 3 years in Pakistan has become more so of a movement almost. You're seeing a lot of activity from different companies that are getting into the space, and a lot of existing companies are trying to reinvent themselves as more kind of modern thinking, startup friendly companies. But and that's also to say that they're not really like competing with each other as you would think, but it's more as Raza mentioned earlier, like a very kind of collaborative experience, which is always kind of great to see. And so you have now associations where different fintech companies are banding together and trying to kind of solve the common problems that all fintechs are facing by having a single kind of entity approach the government to kind of engage them in conversation and dialogue on how to improve policy and regulation for the fintech space in general, but also for the banking system at large in Pakistan. And a lot of these companies also so fintech, I think in Pakistan right now is very, I guess, like at a grassroots level, similar to, as you mentioned, the US was 10 years ago. And where companies, like us and others that are a bit ahead of us are really kind of focusing on building like this ground infrastructure, but also at the same time trying to solve the social side of the fintech problem in Pakistan, which is really about how do you serve the unbanked or the underbanked, and how do you bring them into the fold of this this financial ecosystem that is being built. Because if you kind of just focus on the people that are already there, then you really don't kind of grow beyond what you already have. So it's really about kind of how do you expand this to the entire kind of population of Pakistan in a very economical way. Because on the other hand, you're trying to build a business, and a business has to generate returns for your investors and your shareholders and stuff. So it's very interesting that way to see it really kind of blossom from the ground roots right now. And our part in this is we're also kind of engaged with not only different fintechs, but also obviously our customers who are businesses, both big and small. And we're kind of focused on really building out what we think will be the infrastructure that is needed for companies to build new business models on top of. And what we're most kind of excited about is to see how it evolves and what new companies kind of arise because of what we've hopefully built. Because I think there are a lot more interesting companies that we haven't even thought about that are going to exist in the next 3 or 4 years. So we're really kind of trying to build for them.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Ziyad. What I will say is I'm very bullish about tech entrepreneurs building that more so than banks. So I think you have you're much better at writing software and thinking through UI and UX experiences. So last question before we get to some rapid fire. This event is put on by Open and the Silicon Valley chapter in particular. And Open is the organization for Pakistani entrepreneurs in North America. So our question to you is, what can that community of Open in Silicon Valley, and for all the folks that are on this call, what can they do to support SafePay and the tech ecosystem in Pakistan?
Sure, I can start off with that one. It's a bit of a kind of shameless plug, but again, just being active in the space over here, we're seeing a lot of kind of interesting companies and emerge over here. And I do think the kind of, the community that you have as well, it's an important part of what we want to realize is just literally increasing kind of commerce for these entrepreneurs over here as well. And as Ziyad kind of mentioned, these businesses will be coming online in the near term, in the medium term, and in the long term. And I think it's like incredibly exciting to see diaspora Pakistanis kind of engage with Pakistan. Ziyad and I both have been diaspora Pakistanis as well. We started on SafePay before. Pakistan has become this kind of point of interest for investment as well. And we could have definitely benefited actually like two years ago from either mentorship or investment, for example. But as I mentioned previously, those grassroots were there. So like, interestingly, we were actually selected to present at Open Silicon Valley just before COVID hit last year. So we were kind of planning and preparing for that as well. And I think whatever anyone who's part of this is doing is incredibly important. But yeah, just kind of keep an eye out for Pakistan and, try transact as much as you can from made in Pakistan, I assume.
Yeah, no, just to add on to that, I think obviously the support that we've gotten from Open SV has been overwhelming. And my time in San Francisco, I've been able to kind of meet quite a few of the members, and they were always really encouraging on what I was working on whenever I would talk to them about this idea. Again, with a little bit of hesitation where they're like, oh, well, maybe don't quit your day job just yet. But so there's no doubt there that this group is built by some very talented, smart, interesting people. And I think one ask I would have, similar to Raza, is just don't forget about Pakistan. It will be coming up very soon. And if you're thinking about building something, just first think that there are lower hanging fruits in Pakistan available, and this country could definitely use all the help from smart, talented people who are listening.
Thanks for that. Let's move to some rapid fire. and we're gonna run through a couple questions. They'll be really quick, and we'll go one by one. We'll do Ziyad and Raza, and we'll see how it goes. So, favorite new startup in Pakistan?
I would have to say this new kind of fintech called Naqvi, and mostly because I think the founder is one of the most patient entrepreneurs I've ever seen. So I'm really kind of excited to see how they kind of develop.
Yeah, from my side, a kind of fellow company from YC, they were in the batch before us, called Tajir, which is focusing on the B2B kind of supply side. I think there are some interesting plays to be made there.
All right, Nahari or biryani?
Always a tough one. I'm gonna have to say Nahari.
Yeah, I'm a biryani boy, so I'm gonna have to go with biryani.
Okay. I think Ziyad wins this one because I prefer Nahari as well. But favorite musical artist in Pakistan or otherwise?
Ooh, I've always been a huge fan and still am of Nuri, if anyone still remembers who they are.
Yeah, I just heard Queen this morning and I love them. So I'm gonna go with Queen.
This next one might also make some friends or enemies. I don't know. Karachi or Lahore?
I've never been to Lahore, so
Okay.
Karachi for me.
So far. It's gotta be Karachi.
Okay. You both have known each other for over 25 years, and I'm sure there's a lot you agree on. What's something you two have completely different opinions on?
I think it is mostly around the remote versus non-remote culture and whether or not to actually have an office space of sorts. That's something that we tend to butt heads over quite often. I'm a remote guy. Raza is the more traditional. So it's interesting because we'll end up coming with some sort of hybrid crazy solution that we haven't thought of yet. So still yet to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely pros and cons to both approaches. As Ziyad mentioned, we've really benefited from remote work so far. But I think, as Ziyad mentioned, I think the kind of route forward is a hybrid. But this is definitely a topic that we end up speaking about definitely more regularly now.
Wow. Well, for what it's worth, I think every company in the world is debating that right now. So you're not the only ones. And if you figure it out, let the rest of us know. So now move to some audience Q&A. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to start from the top. How does the state bank's new Rust initiative impact SafePay and its product? And more generally, can you speak to your experiences of working alongside with or engaging with the regulators in Pakistan?
Sure. I can take the first part on Rust, and Ziyad and I have kind of differing opinion. Well, not differing, but different perspectives of just how we've interacted with the state bank. And just as a disclaimer, I used to be a lawyer before, and I used to deal with a financial regulator in the UK. So I definitely had more patience and stamina, I guess. So Rust is actually modeled on what UPI is in India, which is a Unified Payments Interface. I believe that's what the UPI stands for. The idea being that it is going to be like the mother of all interoperability between payment kind of systems over here. And the idea, so one of the problems I mentioned to you right now is a merchant having to integrate separately with different kind of systems, whether it be a wallet or a bank account. And when I say bank account, I mean an account with across the banks, of which there are 30 plus, for example. Rust is kind of in a nutshell aiming to solve that and provide a kind of single point of integration for someone to plug in and allow for payments to go from one area to another without so many intermediaries. What that will mean is that there will be a depression in kind of the fees associated with it. But what it also means is that the kind of costs behind digital payments will reduce, and the chances are that there will be an uptake in it. So as has happened in India over the last 4 to 5 years, for example. In terms of timeline, so there was some kind of press about it earlier this year. I do think the state bank is planning to launch this probably this time next year. And their focus is on kind of government to people payments. So Pakistan actually has a pretty well-established social welfare payment kind of or disbursement system, particularly with this government. It's called the SAS program. And during COVID, it was actually a huge initiative to kind of get cash in the hands of people of the most vulnerable sections of society. So like personally, I'm a huge fan of that. And Rast, essentially was meant, the kind of primary use case from the government's perspective is that we can get money to people quicker and cheaper through something like this. Now, the interesting thing for us is that being able to build on top of that. So as Ziyad mentioned, many of the fintechs that we work with and the kind of collaborations that we have, they've already done a lot of the heavy lifting, creating interoperability, but there are kind of kinks in the system and there are kind of divergent ways that certain fintechs have gone about this. Rast, from our perspective, kind of will standardize that, which makes it easier for us, for example, to build on top of that. And also in terms of how we've interacted with the regulator, the kind of licensing we are pursuing with them will allow us to build on top of Rast. So what we've learned so far is that in order to build on top of Rast, you need to have some kind of regulatory approval. So that kind of lends quite nicely to what we want to achieve. And I'll just be quick about like our interactions with the regulator so far. We deal with the payment systems department over here. And our interactions with them have been very positive from the start. So we reached out to them around a year and a half ago when we were still, 2 people just doing this, and they were very accommodating, encouraging as well. There came a point that we became too big and we needed to kind of like formally create a relationship with them. And that's gone quite kind of well. I'll be the first to say I was surprised, but the interactions have been good. And also the governor currently, Dr. Raza is an ex-IMF guy, really forward thinking. And his deputy governor who deals with digitizations and fintechs in particular, again, ex kind of banker, and she was ex-banker and ex-CEO of a bank over here, which is really leading the charge on digital. So, we found a lot of kind of collaboration with them in our interaction.
Thanks, Raza.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that I think tying into your previous question about misconceptions in Pakistan, one of the misconceptions is that the state bank's kind of always been viewed as an entity that you're not supposed to trifle with in a certain way. You're not supposed to approach them or keep your guard from them because they can really mess you up. But that in reality is not the case, because even before we started the official kind of regulatory process, we were able to kind of talk to them face to face, sit down with them, and get some very valuable advice on how to approach regulation, which license to pursue, and stuff like that. So they're very helpful and they're very, very forward thinking. And this new regime is all about kind of facilitating kind of development in this sector.
That's a great segue to the next question that we have. And just to give some context for everyone on the phone or on the line here, when it comes to merchant onboarding and payments, there's a process called KYC, or Know Your Customer. Basically, what you have to do is you have to go through a series of checks and balances, either because of a regulation in the country or market practice, to basically check that the merchant that's coming online actually is who they say they are, and they're not laundering money or selling drugs or whatever it might be. And so there's a process there called KYC where you have to check, is their legal entity correct, or are they good, can we do some background checks to see if they're laundering money or have done bad activity in their past? And so there's an element here of verification and confirmation that you need to go through. The question involves that, which basically asks, Raza, you talked a bit about some of the digital KYC that you're looking to do. How is SafePay thinking about that in terms of solving that friction for merchants on documentation, whether it's biometric or other legal requirements when it comes to KYC? And where do you see merchants' maximum acceptance with cards versus the NFCs versus the digital wallets of the world?
Sure. So on the KYC side, so Pakistan is currently on the FATF gray list. So over the last, and it's been like this for the last 2 years now, I believe. And particularly over the last 12 months, there have been this kind of host of new regulations as to how a regulated entity has to onboard a customer and the kind of minimum criteria for KYC, as you mentioned. So, I mean, the intention of the kind of regulations and the changes that have come about is obviously very good. Like, I think we would all over here in Pakistan would benefit from a more secure and more safe financial system. However, the downside of it is that it has increased the kind of paperwork behind onboarding someone. So for us, at the stage that we're at right now, we rely on a merchant to have a bank account open with the bank, and having a validly issued kind of what's called a bank account maintenance certificate. And the idea being that to the extent they have that document, some KYC of their operation or their banking activity has occurred. Now, on top of that, we capture information, in terms of kind of identification documentation. We also ask kind of qualitative questions as to kind of their business. And just to go a step back, a lot of this is mandated by the state bank. So capturing, for example, ID documentation, having a board resolution from the directors of the company, and having what's called a Form A over here, or the articles of association of a company over here. And merchants generally, you would have thought wouldn't be happy providing this, but we've really tried to boil down the process to as few steps as possible. So we've created content in that respect, where we link the state bank regulation as well and say that, look, it's not just us being, painful. This is actually something that's happened. Feel free to reach out. In terms of a board resolution, we've actually drafted one which they can print off on their letterhead and sign and then scan back to us. Even in our terms of our merchant agreement, I mean, we're the only player using digital signatures over here. Whereas a lot of the fintechs we deal with, they still rely on physical hard copy signatures on stamp paper, which is super archaic process, but according to their risk controls, that's what they want. And that's despite the fact that Pakistan's actually had a digital signature law for 20 years now. And it's just never really become the done thing. So those are some of the kind of things that we're trying to do to make it easier to onboard. And then Ziyad can maybe mention, personally, we're both fans of a concept of what's called progressive onboarding. So where you start off a merchant on a kind of, very basic package where they can, process a certain amount of payments, not really be able to withdraw those kind of funds and use them, so that you can actually study what their activity is. And again, being a fintech, Ziyad will be able to speak more about this. We can really build to try take account of that.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to what Raza mentioned, one of, I guess, the main challenges for businesses that are in our space or in a regulated environment is, as the whole KYC process, which involves gathering documents from all of these different areas and validating them in a short period of time. One thing that, in my opinion, is really lacking that I wish to kind of see work being done on is interoperability between the different agencies in the government. So, for instance, you have the SCCP in Pakistan, which is responsible for holding on to all of the incorporation details of a company, or whenever you want to start a new company, you go to the SCCP and you file registration. And then you have, NADRA, which I guess is where all of your identity cards and stuff live. And so on and so forth. You have banks that have all your bank maintenance certificates and your account details. So just the ability for a company to connect the dots and expose that through one kind of source would, in my opinion, I think be a game changer in how quickly we're able to kind of onboard merchants, not only in fintech, but I think across any regulated entity or any entity that needs verification. So I'm guessing if you have ride-hailing companies that want to do the same for their captains or their drivers and stuff, they would benefit a lot from a service like that. And I know that these kind of businesses exist in the US, or Pakistani companies can acquire licenses of these kind of larger companies. But I think those kind of companies don't probably have all the data points that exist in Pakistan. So a homegrown solution around that would be really kind of interesting.
So one final question, and this is from Facebook. Has it been a challenge to hire the right talent in Pakistan? And what was the onboarding and training process like for that?
Interesting. Yeah. So I think for me, the next step of my job will be focusing on hiring. So for the longest time, I was building the product, doing all the engineering, and hiring engineers to kind of help me with that. Initially, I was of the opinion that we'll just search and try find obviously optimizing for people who are smart, passionate about what we're working on, and have the right background and experience. But I didn't really care where in the world they were from. So that's how we going to have this like crazy kind of remote team. But recently, especially now, being back in Pakistan and interacting with the community over here, I think there isn't a dearth of talent at all. Where this country probably has some of the smartest programmers that I've come across. It's just there's no centralized way that where they're all kind of communicating and talking or hanging out in a sense, either online or in a physical location. They're too spread out. So that is the main challenge that I think companies over here face, is where to find talent from. And usually they're like, all right, we'll take engineers right out of college and we'll train them and we'll onboard them. And that's what I think we're going to do. But we're also obviously looking for people from our team to kind of refer their friends or whoever. I think one of the main things that's going on with the engineers, and I can only speak to engineers right now, is that a lot of the top tier talent in Pakistan goes for freelancing, because they get to pick what they want to work on. They get to pick their hours, and they get paid by foreign companies paying them in dollars, which ends up being a lot more than what you would earn in Pakistan. And dollars go a long way given how the currency is kind of depreciated. And the second tier, I guess, go into software houses that accept projects from abroad and work on them. So it's similar to freelancing, but we're not really. So I guess now what we're kind of seeing is that because startups in Pakistan are emerging, and because they're getting funded by VCs and a lot of kind of money is coming into Pakistan, this will break. And you'll see a lot of these freelancers who will choose to work for companies in Pakistan, because not only are they solving interesting problems, the tech that they're working with is on the modern side. They're not like old banks working with old software or whatever. So I'm very kind of excited to see how that evolves.
All right. Well, Ziyad and Raza, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you everyone for attending. We also want to thank Open Silicon Valley for putting this event on, to Farhan and the team for doing all the work behind the scenes. Thank you so much for all the work that you always do. And Raza and Ziyad, just wanted to say we're really looking forward to watching your success. I think one thing just to flag, I think from a diversity perspective, it's so great to see a prominent Pakistani startup doing great work. I mean, I think even just the fact that you're at YC and spreading the word about all the opportunities within Pakistan will hopefully continue to spread the word even further. And so really, really appreciate all the work that you're doing in terms of picking up these are huge challenges that you're working on. They are not small. You're working on really, really tough things. And so we really appreciate it, because I think it's going to make life easier for the rest of the tech ecosystem. And so we're all huge fans, and congratulations on all your success so far.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone. We'll call this now. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.